Welcome to today's session. Today is the last session we will cover R. From 2 weeks from now, we will be covering Stata. So as previous weeks have been, we will just cover two modules today, and these will be module 5 and 6. So if we click on the folder and then click on this note here, we should be able to see today's content. Now, the first part will cover mapping and graphing, and the second part will cover data manipulation and some panel regressions. Module 6 is mainly focused on answering some questions that some professors and students wanted to have answered or covered in this note. So for those who are just interested in the graphing and mapping, rather than the second part, just feel free to watch one of the videos rather than both. So right now I want to go ahead and install the libraries that are going to be necessary for the mapping and graphing. There's 3 libraries I've already went ahead and installed because it takes quite a long time. We should now check whether that worked by just running this a couple of times, and if it's blue, that means that things have worked out. So now we can move on to importing some data and creating a histogram. So this first data set that we're going to use is downloaded from GitHub, and I'm just saving the URL as I have been previously, and then I pass that URL into this read.csv function. We can tell, of course, that worked by looking up here. If there's a data set up here, then we are in business. And you can use the head function to see the first 2 rows of the data set. Now, there's a number of ways you can use the histogram function. The first method that I wanted to show you is just typing in the hist function, followed by the name of the data set you want to take data from, and then the $, which grabs a specific column, and then you just run it. If you were to not include this col equals blue, which stands for color, it would just print off as a grade. What is this data set that I'm putting in there? Well, it's just all of the observations from that row. I think I have showed you that before when we were using the mean function, so it's kind of a similar concept. You can also use the histogram function by using dplyr, and so the dplyr function to do basically the same function here is actually pull. So if you do this and this are more or less equivalent. So as a result of pulling that data, then you can add another pipe operator and then use the histogram function, and it should be the exact same thing. And indeed it is. You can also graph those histograms side by side, and so all you have to do is use this function in line 28, and then you need to run 2 histogram functions after it, and if you run it all at once, you'll see that that graph has now been produced. So that worked. So that's what we can do for histogram. For scatter, it's pretty similar. Let's just take a look at the names of our data frame, or the columns, excuse me. And the columns, as you can see, are down there. So again, there's 2 different methods that I wanted to show. There's the one without dplyr, and then there's the one with dplyr. So the first one is just using this plot function, and inside passing it 2 separate different columns. So the total expenditure column and the food column. So we need to make it big enough to plot. It's still a little messy because we're just a little short on real estate, but you get that picture here of what it should look like. Now I want to do the exact same thing, but using dplyr. So it looks kind of similar. But instead of using the $sign in order to select a column, I just use the select column from, or the select function from the dplyr library, and in it I pass in the name of those two columns, and then all I do is attach this pipe operator, which is on a Mac, Command-Shift-M as the shortcut. You should be able to do the exact same thing. And it worked. Now I want to move on to show the ggplot library. So this is a little bit fancier. The functions I was showing before, the plot and hist function, are built-in functions, but this ggplot actually is a library, so we have to go ahead and install it. It doesn't look like it's been installed, so I'll install it. And we can do a lot of the same things that we were just previously doing, but a lot more customization is now available. And it's slightly more confusing, so that's also kind of comes at a little bit of a cost. So the basic outline of a ggplot is you type in the name of the data frame, followed by the pipe operator, followed by the ggplot function. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing. Inside that ggplot function, you want to type in AES, which is the name of another function that I'm not going to get into why they named it like that, but within that AES function, what you need to know is you need to put the X column and the Y column. And of course, these are columns that are in our data set, right? You need to be able to type that column name as it appears in the data set. And then the last step in ggplot is to add the type of data that you want. So in the case of a scatter plot, let's see, did ggplot work? It looks like it worked. In the case of a scatter plot, we just add this geom point, and that will give us scatter. So unfortunately, this is being a little bit difficult. So I was just experiencing a little bit of an error and trying to get this to run, and I essentially just copy and pasted the warning or the error message that I was getting down here into Google, and I found that I needed to run this line of code. And so after running this line of code here, I was able to successfully run this function, this ggplot function that I was just showing you, and it successfully printed that off. I really wanted to bring that up because, Google has a lot of resources for you to find out why something might be going wrong, and so other people most likely have encountered a similar problem, and you can find the answer. Now that we did the basic ggplot, I want to show you a little bit more customization. You can take that same exact function as before, and you just add a plus and this ggtitle, and then you will have a title for your plot. This theme function here helps center that title. You can also, as I show in 2.2, add a color or transparency to the points. And so all you need to do is inside that geom point function, put in alpha and set that between 0 and 1, 1 being the least transparent and 0.01 being kind of the most transparent. And then you can also set the color. So if we run that, let's see that the dots now have been changed. Let's now move on to bar charts. Clean this up just a tad. First step, of course, is to import some data sets. I'm just importing it from GitHub, as we have so many times before. And the basic bar chart follows a similar pattern as the first scatter. So this is actually the code in the note is it's correct, but it's a little bit different than what you saw before. So rather than put the data frame followed by the ggplot. We can actually put that data inside, but for consistency, let's just change it up because we can do the same thing. We put it outside, and we're also filtering as well. To be clear, this function gives you the same data set, but with only rows of cases that are over 1,000. This is actually from a data set produced at the beginning of the pandemic. And so once I set that up like that, I can run that ggplot function as we were running before, putting in the x and the y, which are columns in our data set. And then I am adding the geom_bar function rather than geom_point. So you'll notice that that's pretty close. These stat equals identity has to be there. The rest of these options are just kind of tacked on. This stat equals identity has something to do with producing that bar chart, so that's why it has to be there. And then you can also adjust the axis text, and I'll show you what that means after I run this function. So now that that function has run, you'll see that I have confirmed number of cases for a bunch of different countries, and the y-axis, of course, is the confirm, and the name of the country is on the x-axis, and then this last function down here kind of tilts the text. So you can get a sense that I think already that this ggplot thing is a lot more complicated, but it can also produce pretty nice looking charts. Now, if you wanted the same data set, but if you wanted it arranged in a certain way, you can also do that by the following function. Again, I want to take the data outside of the ggplot function. I mean, it would work either way, but again, I just wanted some consistency. But this time, I want to arrange the confirmed cases, and I want to have that in descending order. So that's what this function does. I can show you very quickly. If I just ran this, we would see the number of cases from highest to lowest. And so we're taking that data and we're using the ggplot function. And we're also telling the x-axis to be reordered based on the names and confirmation, or the number of confirmed cases, excuse me. And then if we run the whole function, we have now produced similar bar chart, slightly different colors, and it's in ascending order. Now let's look at line charts. We're going to download yet another data set. And this data set is actually, I think, the exact same one that we were just using. Sometimes in data, you want to actually change a data type. So what I'm showing you here is this str function, which shows you all of your different columns and the type. So there's integer, that stands for a number. Factor stands for, like, often case, like a string. But it looks like our date column is actually a factor as well, which is not what we want. So we want to be able to convert that factor to a date, and it's done with the following code. You just type in as.date, and then within that put the column that you want to manipulate, and you'll notice that it printed off below. If we wanted to save that change, we would set the name of that column equal to that manipulation, and now it should be a different data type, and we can check that just by running that function again. And what you'll notice now is that the date is a date format. You can see that here as well. So in the first one, it was a factor. In the second one, it says date. So now we know that it's a date format, and that's actually important for a line chart to work. So now I just want to filter out all countries other than Japan, create a new data set called Japan, and now I am going to use the ggplot function and take the data set, put the pipe operator there, put the ggplot, AES, date, and confirmed. And then this time you'll notice that the pattern is maybe becoming more clear. It's geom_line. So the setup is exactly the same as geom_bar and geom_point, but it's geom_line, and you know, a lot of these things you can put inside are similar, and you can make changes. We can also do multiple lines. So this function here is filtering only the Italy and US rows. So if you were to run this function separately, you'll see that we're just getting data for the US and Italy. So try that for yourself. We're using the ggplot function. Again, geom_line. In this case, you need to add AES again, and that color needs to be set to the variable that is kind of like the factor variable that we were kind of just talking about before. It needs to be some type of category, and then it will change the color of the category. So in our case, it's like a country. And so you'll see that now that worked. So we were able to successfully plot multiple lines. You can also do multiple graphs, which is a bit different. And it's a little bit hard because you need to use this grid extra library, which is a bit confusing. And this is in a lot of code, so you're going to have to go through it on your own. But essentially what I do is exactly what I was doing earlier. I'm filtering by country. A lot of times, actually, this is bad code. You should actually save this as df Japan Italy. So now that that's been saved, instead of typing that out over and over again, we can just do this. We can replace that long string of repeated code with what it's been saved as. So now you're going to run each ggplot, and you're going to save that actually as plot1 and plot2. And then at the end, you're going to type in grid.arrange. That's a function from the grid extra library. And you're going to put in the name of those two plots. And when you plot it, it's extremely hard to see because my screen is so small. But it should have worked, and it did. I want to now show you mapping and kind of the basics of how you can go about this in R. Again, there's like graphing, there's a number of packages. Some are built in and some are from external libraries, as we have seen before. So there is kind of a built-in library, and you can see in that built-in library the graphs. This is just a list of all of the types of maps, that you can look at. So if I run this function, it just kind of prints off a little bit more cleanly the names of the maps. If you want to see, for example, the first 10, you could set this to 10 or 20 or whatever it is that you want it to see. I'm just setting it to 5. And so we can also search for different types of maps using the string detect function. And so, for example, if we wanted to search for maps that started with ESRI, we would put in that string detect function ESRI and then the list of those maps. And then it's a bit confusing, but you would put this thing that you're going to save as filter inside of this, and then it will print off the different maps with SRI in it. And if you wanted to finally show some type of map, you can just use the leaflet function followed by add provider tiles, and that is where you're going to pass in the name of the map that you want to see. Now it's a bit hard to see because my screen is so small, but you'll notice that indeed we actually have a map. So try fooling around with it yourself, typing in different stuff, and notice that the map will change. Now I'm going to show you how to map a point on that graph, or map, excuse me. So I'm just setting the longitude and latitude, and then I'm using the leaflet function, the add provider tiles with the name of the map. This time it'll be a different map, and then add markers. And you have to put in LNG for the longitude and the latitude in the LAT. And so when we run this, it should now change, and what you'll notice is that latitude and longitude is actually the map for SPP. So that's how to map like a point. You can also luckily map data from data frames, which is extremely helpful. So let's download this data set from the web. It's just a data set that has the longitude and latitude of colleges across the United States. And so now that that data has been imported, it's imported onto this IPEDS data set. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like, the name of the college, latitude, longitude, and whether it's private or public. So the first example I want to show you is using very, very similar code that we were using before. Leaflet, add provider tiles to specify the map, add circle markers, and then so this is where it's a little bit different than up here. The data we are going to set to the name of that data set. We can give it a radius size, a color, and the name of the pop-up that comes up on the map. So this is the pop-up. It will be the name of the college. Name is actually a column name in that data set. So if we run it, now you'll notice that the entire US has now been dotted. And if you click on it, the name of that dot will show from the name column. You can also do a lot more customization. So this example just shows how to add some bells and whistles. So now when we run this line of code, now the dots are different, and it also includes whether it's public or private. And that was just created by this code, which pastes in the name and the sector label followed by some breaks. Sorry, I'm kind of speeding through here, but explaining every detail is a bit difficult. So if you have questions, please come to the session on Friday. There is more customization that you can do by using this Leaflet Extra library, but I will not cover that in the video because I want to keep the video short, and I am more than happy to answer any questions you have on this code in the Friday session. Thank you again for joining this module covering maps and graphing.